by the time I was out of school in the 19 say 40 49, all the lighting was designed by engineers, and it was all done by calculation. You know, they they didn't ask what the room should look like. The question if they want X foot candles, how many fixtures, and if 3 rows didn't work out, they'd add another fixture somewhere else in the room to make the numbers come out right. So it had nothing to do with design at all. And in fact, even when I studied at MIT, Professor Perry Moon, um, the first day of class, he said he can count the number of qualified illuminating engineers even on this many fingers, because the field's dominated by the light and power industry, who are dealing only with how much light they can sell. So that's why my book was so heavily weighted on fighting the battle for design, as opposed to kind of counteract the bad influence of the industry. I never really looked for a job. You know, architects would call me and say, we never even discuss fees, how soon can you get here? And then I'd start with one project in an office, and the architects were so pleased to have someone who could speak the language of design. The first thing I knew, I was working on all the projects in that office. You know, that's why it's like in some of my early practice, there were a lot of projects in Montreal. I started one firm, one project there, and I was with that firm in a few years. As they built from say 15 people to 300 in the office, did a lot of projects at that point. And so my whole career has been with very few architects, because I did all of their work, and they were looking for. Well, I made suggestions. I found that in order to do good lighting design, I had to be involved in total architecture. If the ceiling was too low for indirect lighting, I'd show how you could have a higher ceiling, suggest the structure and where to place the mechanical system, so that we can have a good net to gross ratio. You know, I was showing people how you can get a 10.5 foot ceiling and 11 foot floor to floor height, instead of 14 foot floor to floor height with an 8 foot ceiling, like that many people are doing. So, and I was as interested in you know, it's easy to do lighting for even for a museum or a church, something simple, a restaurant. But in my practice, I was as interested, or even more interested in showing how you do good lighting in offices and libraries and factories and any kind of building. I think what's happened is that when I started, there was no such thing as a budget for a lighting consultant. So the people hired me, paid for me out of their own fees, and I did very inexpensively, because I wasn't doing drawings. I was just doing concepts and working with the architects on the drawings, and so I think there is a lot more lighting design, and a lot more hardware that's now good. I mean, used to. I remember when Edison Price was the only one who made a decent, you know, low brightness downlight, which then I guess they had a license with Urkel, and it wasn't such when I was working on street lighting for Baltimore. I wanted to use full cutoff fixtures. There weren't anything being made in the U.S. In fact, I went to Germany and brought back, sampled some Schotzen back from Frankfurt and from Philips, and then eventually, you know, American manufacturers stopped making that, but there weren't to obtained in the U.S. at that point, because everyone was using, again, thinking quantity rather than visibility. And so I think there's been a great improvement. But what I find is not so common though is the level of integration between lighting and architecture that I've always tried to accomplish. In fact, I find that European lighting design is much more about hardware and not so much about concept. And you know, to me, the last thing I'm thinking about is light fixture. Much more important that what I'm trying to light, what does it want to look like, where should the light source be, what light distribution I'd have to have in order to accomplish that purpose. Then finding the fixture or creating one if the one doesn't exist. And so that you know, I think in European lighting design there's probably just too much focus on light fixtures. To me, it's one thing doing direct lighting, but it's much more important is what is I'm trying to light, what's the surface, and not having a cluttered ceiling of indirect fixtures, but integrating it in the structural system within the furniture. So my objective is to have a space where you know the lighting effect, but you don't even know where the lighting fixtures are. And if they're there and visible, then it's because it's a chandelier. Well, I think today there are a lot of lighting designers who are very competent technically, and I think the lack is it's not something that typical lighting design is going to be able to do, because I think the need is for architects to think of a lighting concept as part of the architecture. So, in fact, I've never hired anyone in my office, which I've now retired from at Lamb Partners, but I've never hired anyone who wasn't didn't have a degree in architecture, or at least interior design. But in fact, almost everybody's been an architect. So I can turn an architect into an architect's lighting designer. I can't so much turn someone who's a theatrical lighting designer into thinking about architecture. Some people might be naturally talented and can do both, but I think it's a better start to think about the whole building and thinking about architecture. And but unfortunately, most architecture schools look at lighting as you know, in class with you know, with mechanical.